The Retirement Cafe podcast, helping women talk about money with Carole Haswell. Hello and welcome. It's great that you've joined me for the latest episode. This week, I'm excited to share with you a conversation I had recently with Carole Haswell. Carole left the finance industry to bring up her two children, swearing she would never return to a male-dominated arena. But 15 years later, she found herself sat in a conference room dominated by men, waiting for a talk on tax. When the speaker described a case study full of the gender stereotypes, Carole's interest was piqued. Carole went on to qualify as a financial advisor and set up an initiative to educate women about money and encourage them to get involved in understanding their finances. In our conversation, Carole and I discuss the gender stereotypes that still exist around finances and how women can engage more with their money. Carole also shares a few stories from the workshops that she has run to help get women discussing their finances. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Carole Haswell. Welcome to the Retirement Cafe podcast, Carole Haswell.
Hi, Justin. Hi. Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
No, I've been looking forward to our conversation. Now, Carole, for those who don't know you, tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do and where you work and all that type of thing.
Okay, well, I'm a financial planner at Talking Finances, which is a firm of financial advisors. And I've not been doing it all that long. I was quite late to the party, actually. I had a big career break with children, and during that time was when I decided I would retrain and took the exams to become a financial planner, and that's what I did, and that's where I'm at right now. But I have a particular focus actually on getting women to engage perhaps a little bit more than they feel comfortable with in matters of sort of long-term finance, particularly pensions, savings, investment and risk, in fact.
Yeah, wow. And what was it? I mean, obviously you're female yourself, but what was it that, you thought there was a huge need for trying to engage women with money?
Well, it was actually while I was doing my exams, I went to a conference for advisors. You'll know the sort of thing, Justin, where there was a speaker. He was talking about tax, and I was halfway through my exam, so I was paying attention. I was even taking notes, and he laid out a scenario. Actually, well, just to say as well, I think the room was probably populated with about 4/5 male advisors and 1/5 female advisors, and he laid out the scenario where there would be a client couple, a man and a woman, and he said something along the lines of, they're coming up for retirement, there's a tax-free lump sum coming up, and he wants to know what growth assets to invest in, and she wants a new kitchen. And I just thought, what? Is this stereotyping still going on? A little bit later, the old favourite of the poor little dear old widow came out, whose husband has died and left her with all these stocks and shares, and she doesn't understand them. Enter Mr. Financial Planner, who will just sort it all out for her. And I just thought, I can't quite believe that with all the shifts that have gone on in the equality landscape and the massive changes that have happened in the sort of economic power of women over the last couple of decades and even before that, that these stereotypes are still being wheeled out. And nobody else in the room really took any notice. It was like nobody batted an eyelid. And momentarily, I just thought, I'm not sure I want to be part of this industry. I'm not sure this is for me. And I sort of started noticing clients coming in where they were couples, where it was a man and a woman, that quite often the man might be a bit more engaged. I mean, not in all cases, and I hate to do the stereotyping myself, but I was noticing that was what was happening. The man might be a bit more engaged than the woman. He would typically perhaps have a slightly more adventurous attitude to risk, a bit, slightly more happy to take on risk, and she might be a bit more cautious. And I just started thinking, I wonder why that is. I wonder what's going on here. And I thought about all of the people that I was coming across. So the reps from the investment providers, a lot of the other advisors that I was meeting at conferences and things, and it just felt very, very male. And a lot of the literature felt quite male as well. And I wondered whether it was that was alienating women. So I sort of looked at some of the statistics, and I mean, they're a couple of years old now. I don't know if they're the same, but at the time, I think the numbers quoted were that something like 1 in 3 men might have an investment product outside of the workplace pension. That compares with 1 in 5 women, so that's quite a big gap. And I think there's a similar gap, if not a bit wider, in terms of how many women would seek out advice on their own as opposed to how many men would. And I just sort of started thinking, well, maybe women don't think that this is an industry that is even sort of meant for them, whether they feel that it's addressing them in any way. So I thought, well, look, I can't force women through the door. I can't force them to take an interest in investment products, but I could perhaps invite them in, which is when I started thinking about running sort of small, informal workshops for women, local women, to come in. We would do it of an evening. This is pre-COVID, obviously, when we were allowed to do this kind of thing. And they'd come in of an evening and we'd sit around the table and have a cup of tea or a glass of wine and talk about how they felt about investments, how they felt about risk, what they understood, what they didn't, and really try to sort of get to the bottom of why it was that many of them felt quite reticent when it came to this subject.
Yeah, and so what did you discover? I mean, what was there? Was the stereotype right? What was the kind of insight that you got from when you started doing these workshops with these ladies?
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose in a way, the ones who were coming in were, because I was presenting it as like scared of investing, come and have a chat about it. So already the population that I was kind of talking to was already a bit self-confessed behind the curve. But yes, very much so. I did find that at the start of the workshops, I might say, for example, when I say investing, what do you think? And mostly the answer I would get was, oh, it's risky. I'd been sort of digging around a bit and doing some research, and it turned out that, for the last sort of 5 years or so, big finance has been looking at this enormously and saying, well, look, women aren't investing, what's going on? And in an attempt, obviously, to target them, they are looking at things that, and the reasons why. But there's all these surveys and all these studies going on. And I think some of it is filtering through to the marketing departments, but it looks to me like all they're doing is kind of swapping out the squeaky clean, smart young men for squeaky clean, smart young women in the adverts and hoping that will do the trick. But the women I was speaking to, not aware of this at all, and I would mention some of the really fantastic consumer sites that are out there that are aimed at women, that are, attempting to package this topic in a way that feels relatable to them. And when I do point them out, they're like, oh my God, that's fantastic, that's brilliant, but they don't know it's there. They don't even know some of the time that they're supposed to be looking at it, if you know what I mean. They're sort of like, oh God, but I've got a pension at work, I'm going to be okay. And it's getting through that.
So Carole, I mean, you can blame a certain amount here on the marketing department, but what is it that we need women to do? Why is it? I mean, there must be some kind of reason that males are engaging with investing and females aren't. So if we're to encourage females to take a greater interest in this, what is it? I mean, what can they do themselves? I mean, if someone's listening to this, and most of our audience, as you know, is going to be retirees or people thinking of retiring in the near future, and they're going, do you know what? I really don't know much about this. What is it that they can do? What is the kind of guidance? And I mean, not everyone can get to one of your workshops or or come, I mean, possibly even not even able to sit around a coffee table now with you.
Exactly.
But what is it that our listeners could do, action steps that they could take?
Okay, so there's a couple of things. I mean, I think first of all is to say, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of your pension statement. Don't be afraid of this topic. I mean, that's a big kind of general thing to say. But if you're still in work and you are contributing to a workplace pension in some way, I think the first port of call would be to take a look at that and just challenge yourself to really look at it and see if you can understand it, to make a note of any of the things that you don't understand, and then maybe go to an unbiased website like, for example, the Pension Advisory Service, the government-backed one's Money Advice Service. There are some fantastic explanations, some really good plain English explanations out there. And I think that's your first step, is saying, well, try and understand what it is that you've already got, and then start thinking about whether or not that's going to be enough. And, Justin, sometimes actually it's complicated. You might have a number of pensions and you might need the help of a professional. But I would say to women, first of all, get to grips with what you've already got, and then start thinking about whether or not it's enough. In a more general sense, when it comes to the investing, I think that, we talk in the workshops a lot about why it is that women feel the way they do about this topic. And a lot of women said to me, they wouldn't dream of coming into a financial advisor's office. They would feel stupid. They would feel they couldn't ask the questions and things like that. And I think it's up to advisors to some extent to be a bit more welcoming, and to not present in a way that implies some assumed knowledge. And I think that's most people's fear. It's the same as if you're not mechanically minded and you take your car for a service, and you've got this fear that they're going to start talking to you about stuff you don't understand, and you're expected to understand it because you've taken your car there, you own a car, surely I should know about this. And I think it's the same with pensions and investments. People think, I don't really get this, and I'm hoping someone else will just sort it out for me. So I think in terms of what can be done, it is the industry has to do more. And one of the things that I'm doing as well is I'm blogging about it in a way that I try to sort of squeeze the topic of investment and risk into the blogs, but make them about something relatable, so that people realise that it's not investing isn't something that happens over here in your life. It's part of it. It's, providing for your retirement and providing a life that includes the things you value means you've got to actually accept that you need your money to grow in those years running up to it, which means actually accepting that you're going to have to take some risk. And so getting to grips with those ideas is sort of one of the first things that I think women need to do. And there are a lot of resources out there, as I say, a lot of really good websites that are tackling these things. But the first step is to know that you need to take a look in order to see what you've got to provide for yourself. Yeah,
absolutely. So listening to you there, I'm thinking, this is wonderful to go and educate yourself, understand. I mean, you obviously, as we know, that everyone is, if they're employed at the moment, they probably are in some kind of workplace pension scheme. And therefore, they are actually making a decision each day, each month, as every contribution goes in, they are making an investment decision. Now, that might have been kind of the default the default decision, or just, whatever the standard option was. But it is a decision that they're making, isn't it? So how can they get to grips with that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It is a decision, but it very rarely feels like it is one. And the women that I've spoken to have said, "Oh, we had a pensions talk at work when I started. I didn't understand what they were talking about. I just ticked the default, or I didn't get it." There is this feeling, I think, particularly with the auto enrolment now, but also if you're working for a company that provides a pension for you, there is a feeling that it's almost been taken out of your hands. We're dealing with this so that you don't have to. There is that sort of sense that, oh, I've got a pension at work, I'm okay. It's like you say, well, do you know how much your pension is providing? Do you know what it's invested in? No idea. And it is actually getting women to see that if they've got a pension, they are investors. And then they should own that a little bit and say, okay, yeah, I am an investor. All I need to do now is to understand what's beneath the bonnet. And if you have got a pension and you've got some sort of online access to it, you should be able to find out what it is that you're invested in. And if you can't, you should go to somebody at work and ask them to help you to find out what you're invested in, if you do want to take an interest in it. I think quite worryingly, I heard a couple of weeks ago actually where there was a survey done for the National Pension Savings Association, I think it's called, into auto enrolment, and about 1 in 3 people asked thought that the minimum contribution, which is the combined employer and employee contribution of 8%, they thought that had been designed to provide a comfortable retirement. And you think, that is quite a worrying but understandable position. I think people think, oh, this pension is there, it must be enough, it must be good enough for me because somebody else has sort of said, well, these are the amounts you should put in. And what I say to women, particularly to younger women actually, who are still sort of accumulating their pension provisions, what I would say to them is that don't assume that your earnings progression throughout your life is going to follow the assumptions that are made in your pension. Because if you look at, you might get your pension statement every year and you look at the illustration and it might tell you, well, you know, this pension is going to provide you the equivalent of £12,000 a year or whatever. That's if you continue contributing at the rate you are now, but going up by a stated amount, maybe 2.5% every year. Now, women's lives don't tend to go in a straight line where their earnings are concerned. And I think the younger women need to have a heads up on this. They need to really fully understand that if they make a decision to have a career break, if they make a decision to go part-time, if they make a decision to maybe take a job where it's more designed to fit in with family than it is to increase their earnings, then all of those things are also affecting their pension. And I don't think that's fully understood. And I think, you know, and this goes back to the industry having grown up with men in mind. It's like the pension statement assumes a more male type of earnings progression than a female type of earnings progression. And I think it's really important that women understand that nobody is going to come along halfway through their life and say, oh, by the way, you're not contributing enough, you need to put a bit more in. You know, that's up to you. That's up to you to kind of get your head round and work it out for yourself. So a lot more needs to be done, and I think some of that does have to come from the industry. I've got one of the people who came to the workshop actually one time, and she was saying she's a nurse and she does have what would be considered a good pension because it's going to be guaranteed income at the end of it. And her children are the same age as mine, and she said that when she went part-time, she had no idea that that was affecting the amount of money that was going into her pension. It was a chance conversation with someone sort of sometime later who said, oh, well, of course, you won't be getting as much now as you thought you were going to before you had the children because you've gone part-time. And she was like, oh, nobody told me that. You know, and there were all these assumptions being made all the time that people will understand these things. And I think there's a lot of educating that needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think as people get closer and closer to retirement, we're often talking quite significant sums, of course, as well. I mean, if people have saved over a 20, 30-year career, they may have amassed, many thousands of pounds in a pension fund, which they're making decisions on. In essence, again, as we said before, if they're not making a decision on it, then they're still making a decision on it by just being in that default option. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I'd be interested to know about what your insight is do women, do they understand their state pension provision?
Well, I think yes and no. So they do seem to have a better understanding of that actually than the ones I've spoken to anyway, than of their either workplace or personal pension provision. They understand it as a guaranteed income. I think the thing that, and again, this is something for younger women, I press upon them, do register for child benefit because you'll get your credits then, and that's something that isn't always known. But I mean, that's one of the most simple things that you can do, isn't it, in the run up to retirement, is to request a forecast of your state pension, and that gives you a really good building block, because if you have made enough contributions, then you have got this, you'll know what your guaranteed income is going to be. If you haven't been making the contributions, then if you've got time to make some voluntary ones again to make up that guaranteed income, which as a financial planner, you know that's your goal, isn't to have a bedrock of something that's guaranteed on top of which you can layer perhaps the other stuff. So yeah, funnily enough, I do find that women do seem to be on top of their state pension a bit more, and I don't know whether that's because that's something that, although the provision of it has changed, as a concept that has been with us all the time. I think there's a lot of legacy stuff going on here in the way that people understand about their retirement provision. So, if you grew up where your parents, or perhaps only one parent, went to work and stayed in the same company all their life, and at the end of it they retired and they got a lovely guaranteed income that was enough for them as a couple to survive, and then if they died the spouse got 50%, and there was this sense that plus the government, that was, you were being looked after. The changes that have happened in the way that pensions are provided, and with that, the fact that you've got to take on the investment risk yourself in a lot of cases, I think that hasn't filtered through to people's sort of consciousness or subconsciousness. They still got this idea that pensions are something that somebody else provides for them. But the state pension is something that has actually remained quite constant. So I think they may have heard their parents or their grandparents talking about the state pension, so they will be aware of that probably in a clearer way than they are about the other sorts of pensions where the provision has been changing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, that's fascinating chatting to you. Carole, what would if I could give you a free wish, and in 3 years' time, something's happened in the world of women in finance, what would you like to have happened?
I would like women to feel that the financial advice and financial planning was something that was meant for them. And I think the way to that is for advisors and planners perhaps to just take a little bit of a look at the way they've been doing things over the past decades, and whether or not they're still dancing to an all-male tune in the way they would have done generations ago. So I would like to feel that it was more a part of the community, where it was open for education as much as anything else, because yes, it's a business, but taking a long view in terms of sort of educating people and helping them to feel comfortable about coming in, helping them to pass on their knowledge down the generations about how people need to provide for themselves, that is something that planners and advisors can do. I think we can open our doors a little bit more and not be scary. And I would like the finance industry generally to be thinking a bit more like a woman sometimes, in terms of how your earnings going to go, in terms of how your life is going to pan out, and to stop assuming that you're going to have this straight line earnings progression, and get that thought into people's heads that when you make a decision that affects anything to do with your money, whether, even deciding to take a year off to go traveling when you're young, whatever it is, whatever decision you make, don't just look at the day-to-day budgeting of what you're doing, think about the long term as well. So I suppose I would like people to think of pensions and investments and long-term savings in the same way as they do their day-to-day budgeting.
Yeah, those are wise thoughts, Carole, and I absolutely agree with you. So, Carole, where can people find out more about you and the great work that you do?
Okay, well, we have a website, which is www.talkingfinances.co.uk, and there is a With Women page on there. From there, you can sign up to my blog, and if you sign up to that, then I give notifications of any events that I'm doing as well. It is a lot about investing and about risk, and about how it's actually thinking about investment risk is the same as thinking about risk in other areas of our lives. But I have also been looking at sustainable investing and ESG investing, because I think that this might represent more of a way in for people who are not used to investing. So I don't want to label women as being more likely to want to do this kind of investing, but I do think that for non-investors, and most women are non-investors, sustainable investing can perhaps offer something relatable that might entice them into the whole area of investing in a way that perhaps looking at the balance sheet of a company would not necessarily entice them in. So that's another area that I think is growing, that I think we can make stories out of it that are relatable to our lives. And I think that might actually be a good way of getting people who are not used to the idea of investing to take a look and to see whether or not they are prepared to take on the risk for something that might be promoting a greater good.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much for talking to me, Carole, this morning. We'll put all links to your website and your blog in the show notes. And once again, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you very much.
Thanks once again to Carole Haswell for joining me today. For more information on talking finances with women, check out the show notes on our website at theretirementcafe.co.uk. You will find a few other helpful links there too. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please do leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to the podcast either on our website or your preferred podcast player so that you don't miss an episode. And remember that all the podcasts are on my YouTube channel. That's Justin King MFP, where you'll find more video content about retirement planning. If you would like to get in touch, you can find me on Twitter at Justin King CFP, or you can email me on hello@theretirementcafe.co.uk. So until next time, I'm Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.